Three, two, one. Welcome to the Mobile Hunters Podcast. We're your hosts, Rick Cates and Chris Leppert.
What's up?
And we are joined tonight for our final episode of Psyche of a Hunter. We started this series way back in January. Kind of fell off during turkey season because we love talking turkeys.
We love turkeys.
we love talking turkeys. But tonight we are really, I feel like this is a podcast I've been wanting to do for a long time. We are joined by Kevin Behr. Kevin, how you doing?
Good. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Chris, for having me.
Yeah,
Awesome.
no problem.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, Kevin was a officer for Fish and Wildlife in Ohio up until, you said you came in 93 and ran all the way up to 2020, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
My career went out with a bang.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I left with a bang.
Yes, yeah, that you did, which we're going to get into, which is a big part of this podcast. So for those of you who don't know, I don't think we're going to give anything away. Kevin, you were injured in the line of duty, and your story is one that I feel is something that really needs to be out there, really needs to be told. And I know you said you've been on some other podcasts and talked about it, but specifically for our group with mobile hunting, we're back in the woods. We're doing stuff way far off the beaten path, and I think that there's a common misconception with game wardens and that kind of stuff that needs to kind of be told to everybody. And I didn't want our podcast to be any different with that.
Sure, yeah. It's a big aspect of what a wildlife officer, conservation officer does. And just to kind of expand that just a little bit, and then we'll kind of jump off from there. Just the sheer numbers or lack thereof. So in most states, there's one wildlife officer, conservation officer spread in a pretty large area. In Ohio, it happens to be one per county typically. So if you look at just the amount of land or area of responsibility that a particular wildlife officer may have, and the number of individuals that engage in recreational activities, the likelihood or the chance of coming across a wildlife officer in the field are pretty slim. I've heard different figures of 1 in 60,000 or something like that, but I don't know that. I don't know the basis for those figures. But I can say, in my career, it's a pretty slim chance. It's a common thing when you come across somebody. It's common for them to say, "That's the first time I've ever seen a wildlife officer or a game warden," or "It's the first time I've ever been checked in the field before."
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's part of the process.
Awesome. Well, I want to kind of get into your background and just from a general sense, how you became in the outdoors. How did you grow up as in like an outdoor family? What was life like in shaping you for kind of your career, but more importantly, as you grew up, what was outdoor life like for you?
I guess the simplest place to start with is I grew up on the west side of Cincinnati, out in Hamilton County, right, almost in Indiana, kind of in that far southwest corner of Ohio. And for me, being in the outdoors was a natural drawing. Growing up, the kids that wanted to go play baseball or football or those types of things, yeah, I did participate in those sports, but give you an example, I can remember being at football practices and talking about going squirrel hunting afterwards. Not remembering plays, not remembering, that type of thing. But we were talking about where we're going squirrel hunting. So that aspect of my just psyche, I enjoyed the natural resources. I was always fascinated by the natural resources. Growing up in the suburbs of Cincinnati, I didn't have a lot of opportunities. So the opportunities that I did have, I had to take advantage of them any way that I could, as far as just being exposed. It didn't matter to me if it was fishing, if it was hunting, trapping, just being outside. I was more interested in going down to the creek and looking at raccoon tracks, or talking with somebody that was having a conversation about a big deer they'd seen or something like that. Versus following NASCAR or something like that. So it was a natural draw, I guess, kind of my pre-programming, I guess. Some people are programmed to be, maybe in the nursing field or something like that, where to me it was a natural thing. It wasn't anything I had to struggle. I truly enjoyed every second that I could. I spent a lot of time daydreaming in classes about being outside and looking out the window and not worrying about going to the library, except if it was to go read a fur fishing game or a hunting magazine, something like that.
Good deal. So obviously from a young age, this was something ingrained in you, and you felt like I really like this. I love this. This is a big part of who I want to be and who I am.
Yeah, I've heard it said before. Are you called to be a natural resources or wildlife officer, or do you choose to be one? And I think it's a little bit of both. But I think some of the most effective officers are ones that have just that natural drawing to it, that immerse themselves in the whole entire experience, together, not just one aspect of it. So yeah, for me, it wasn't a hard draw, to say the least. I had a lot of good people around me, growing up. My dad would participate in the outdoors, but he was busy at work, and so I relied on friends and family and any chance I had to get some exposure. And luckily, I had some really good people to show me the outdoors and get me started off in the right aspect of that. And as I progressed through school, I had some good teachers along the way as well that recognized that, and kind of a little bit old school in the sense that, hey, if things go really good this week, I've heard the trout might be biting down at the local park or something like that. So yeah, I was very fortunate that got me into that aspect, and every step of the way, there was never hesitation for me at all. It was never like, oh, I wonder what something else was like. I'd be like, hey, I'm a wildlife officer, and I don't, that's neat. You do that, but man, let me tell you about the eagle that I saw last week or something along those lines.
Nice. So how did obviously you go through school, and then did you go straight into the academy like that? Like you knew, like obviously it sounds like you knew that that's what you wanted to do. Was it straight into the academy? Did you go how did you find your way into Department of Natural Resources?
Right. So after high school and into college and getting later into college, I started looking at internships, and I was really focused more into Ohio because that's what I had the most exposure to. And so after graduating college, I started doing a couple of interns with the Department of Natural Resources Division of Wildlife, and I got hired on full time in '93, and the next Wildlife Officer Academy started in '96. The hiring process was in '90, working through the year of '95. It takes about a year for that process. So my academy started in January 5th of 1996 at the Ohio State Highway Patrol Academy. I had already completed the minimum requirements for to be a police officer in Ohio, but this particular class, they sent us all back through the Highway Patrol Academy. So I started in January of '96 there. So I was fortunate enough to get in on the first try. A lot of folks talk about how many times it takes them trying to get in, trying. And I was fortunate enough to actually get in on the first attempt. So I started in the Wildlife Officer School in 1996. We graduated later, I think it was in May of '96. And my first assignment was in Warren County, Ohio, which is just north of Cincinnati. It's one county north of Hamilton. And it kind of is sandwiched between Cincinnati and Dayton. So that was my first assignment. Worked there from 96 through 99. And then I transferred to Adams County, which is about an hour or so, maybe an hour and a half to the east of Cincinnati along the Ohio River, so south central part of the of Ohio in our district. And a lot more resource down there, a lot less people. But the vast majority of people that they're, do engage in recreational activities. So I spent the early part of my career in Adams County as a uniformed patrol officer. And in 2006, there was an opening within the investigative unit within our department. So I applied for that and made it in first try again. So I went to the investigative section, which basically is equivalent of like a detective bureau of a police department or a sheriff's department. So yeah, basically went from uniform patrol into plainclothes, worked longer, more in-depth, complex cases that may be investigations that would encompass multiple counties, sometimes even across state lines, and typically more in-depth things so that the uniformed officers could, the way that typically works is the uniformed officer starts an investigation off, and then they'll hand it over to the investigator. So I worked investigations from 2006 to December 20th of 2020 is when I was shot.
I still can't. We discussed a little bit of this over dinner tonight, and I did not have the right story at all. So I'm still just kind of
taking it all in.
Yeah, it's heavy.
So as a patrol officer, and eventually going into investigative unit, that led you into, like you said, some other aspects of DNR work, including working with Department or
U.S. Fish and Wildlife
U.S.
Service.
Fish and Wildlife Service.
Yes,
I keep wanting to say.
Didn't you grow up in this?
I did. And I still get all of them. I still get all of them wrong.
Yeah.
You had certain things that you did with Fish and Wildlife Service.
Sure.
So that's all at the federal level, correct?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. A lot of the cases will span state lines, and putting all those pieces together, putting all the entire puzzle together, a lot of times requires multiple aspects, including different states, different agencies. But when a problem is big enough or complex enough, you can bring a lot of pieces of the puzzle together, or a lot of different tools in the toolbox together to address something that's maybe more widespread, more chronic, issues that are more ongoing, I guess is the best way to describe it. And I was very fortunate to have the folks around me to support me to do that, namely my family, but also the folks that I worked with, and was blessed to be able to link up with some of the best investigators and other officers in other states and other agencies. It really helped me along, really helped me to develop and grow and see things in a different light a lot of times, and things that you work at, and somebody else comes along and says, "Oh, wait, here, look at this." I'm like, "Daggone, I wish I," But that's just all part of it. That's just having an open mind and working hard to a common goal or a common aspect. And in our case, it was to address issues that were affecting our natural resources.
So did that fall? So when I think of Fish and Wildlife Service, I think a lot of Lacey Act violations, that kind of stuff. Is that primarily the type of stuff that you would investigate, or are there larger pieces to that kind of the common person may not know a whole lot about?
Lacey Act is generally one of the bigger aspects that would be addressed. But anytime that something is harvested unlawfully, or there's an unlawful act and it's facilitated across the state line, then a lot of the other state statutes kind of get bypassed, and it gets kicked up to the federal side. And the federal folks have specialized sections within their own U.S. Attorney's Office to address some of those issues. And working with those folks was absolutely phenomenal. I learned so much and grew so much, and made some friends for life, in doing that.
That's awesome.
I like it.
Yeah, I gotta say, one, I didn't realize that you did specialized work with the Fish and Wildlife Service. I mean, I think that's pretty. I think of, like we were talking upstairs, like the butterfly thing with that whole ring being busted and that kind of stuff. I think that those things are they get a lot of, they don't oftentimes get a lot of press, but they're still extremely important because they're protecting it. Like that's line of defense against natural resources that we hold and we all love and recreate in on a regular basis.
Oh, sure. Yeah, exactly. It's trying to look at things at a bigger picture, bigger aspect, to affect more of the natural resources side of things, and quite frankly, to make sure that if there is issues, it's getting addressed as best as it can be. So that's the big side of being able to put together this task force and work within those folks. It's phenomenal, and it's something that I like to see progress forward as it's going. I know it still is, but yeah, it's lot of interesting times, to say the least.
Absolutely.
So I have to ask, other than the story we're going to get into, do you have any like notable cases that you ran that were just one that you remember that was maybe stood out strange, or where, like, I watched what is the show on like Nat Geo or whatever
Trafficked.
about game wardens.
Oh yeah.
Where
Wardens,
they, there was some dude maybe out in California, like I can't remember what they're called, but the little shelled looking, oh God, you're abalone or something like
Abalone.
that. Abalone.
Yeah.
Like I would never in my life even know what that was or that it existed if I didn't see it there. You got anything along those lines that you kind of made a bust or?
Oh sure. So American paddlefish. I don't know.
Okay.
Some people call them spoonbill
Yeah.
catfish, American paddlefish. So a lot of issues with those. One is they're very reliant on good quality water.
Okay.
They have high quality water for them to be able to make a living. Some people call them spoonbill catfish, but the American paddlefish. And just a brief little history with American paddlefish. They are harvested for flesh, but mostly for the eggs because they are made into caviar.
Made caviar. Yep.
And
Wow.
there's a whole aspect of why that comes about and things. Well, in Ohio, they're protected. A lot of the states are protected. Some states, they're not. And when you deal with something that is relatively small in stature, quality, or quantity or size, it's easily to be trafficked. And it's like any other type of thing that is entered into commerce. The only way that you increase profit margin is to increase volume. So you have to add something to it to make it worth more money. And so we started working on an investigation out of Adams County, Ohio, of all places, where there was some paddlefish that were taken unlawfully. And one thing led to another, led to another, and it turns out that this was part of a group that was working all the way down into the Mississippi Valley.
Wow.
So putting all those pieces together into the depths of what they do and how they do it to unlawfully harvest these fish that are protected in a lot of waters. And the other aspect of them is they are becoming more and more, I shouldn't say just stressed or have a harder time making it because of the influx of the invasive carp, because they compete directly for some of the same food sources.
They're both filter feeders, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So as the invasive carp keep coming upstream, so to speak, it's harder and harder on the paddlefish. So it warrants them more protection. And anytime that things become less available to have, people will go after them typically more because the demand goes up, the price goes up.
And you're strictly referring to like the Asian carp and all that, right? Not the common?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So, working on that side of things with starting off in Ohio and branching out to other states and then involving the Fish and Wildlife Service. But, just here on the Ohio River, the paddlefish were taken unlawfully. And where they end up, most of them end up across in Europe or on cruise ships because they're sold as not quite sturgeon caviar, but it's the next best
thing.
And it's phenomenal to think of, paddlefish on the Ohio River are taken unlawfully and how those eggs are processed into a product and how the products end in other ports of entry, which ultimately a lot of times they'll maybe have 2 or 3 transactions and then they'll end up in a foreign market.
God.
And the way that, in the degree that people will put themselves out to profit off the process. And those are the ones that we typically would like to focus on a lot, because it's something that once those numbers start down that downward spiral, it's hard to bring them back up. There's a lot of things going after them.
Once you start harvesting over a certain amount, I mean, obviously if it's a protected, you can't harvest it at all.
Correct.
But if you only have a finite resource of something and someone comes in and takes a chunk out of them, like the likelihood of that thing reproducing and trying to go back up to any type of menial number is, can be a catastrophic thing.
Yeah.
How long does it take them to reach maturity to reproduce and all that?
I think biologically, depending on the conditions, they're in between 8 and 10 years.
So that's insane then, because I know sturgeon are I think they're like 20 or 30 years or something like that.
Yeah, and it's a terminal process. It's not like they can bring the fish out, extract eggs, and put it back in the water.
Right.
It's terminal format.
Yeah.
It's a one and done.
Jesus.
kind of process to them. So yeah, they're a very fragile species, and there's a lot of aspects that technology has progressed that's made them more susceptible, to say the least. But yeah, that was some big cases I worked on. On some other ginseng cases. I worked on a ginseng case that involved a murder several years ago. Yeah, and they're just like I said, things that that kind of sit with me is the real exciting ones. One led to another. So yeah, more deer cases and things along those lines. But those are some of the ones that have stood out.
I didn't realize it, and until probably I was in my 20s. I did not realize that it was ever even legal to take ginseng at any point, because I had always only heard of it being taken illegally.
Right.
And
Oh, wow.
yeah, I didn't. I had no idea that it was like there was a legal thing. I thought it was like if you touched it, you found it, like you're getting fined or
Right.
or things like that. Which so that kind of leads me into my next question is. People have lots of misconceptions about game wardens, about laws, about things like that. From your perspective, what are some of the big ones that you see or you saw as a warden or as an officer that a lot of people tended to have and continue to have that you run into?
It's I don't know. There's a lot of ways to look at it, but I guess the best way to describe it's like this. Me as a wildlife officer, especially a uniformed officer patrolling a particular area, the best officers are the ones that have true interest in the process. And I'll give you two examples, and you guys tell me which one kind of palates better. One is if an officer comes up on you and you're down there, say on the bank fishing, and the officer comes up and says, "Let me see your license," and that's the extent of the conversation. It kind of sets kind of a I don't know, just kind of an off kilter kind of tone.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Whereas if the officer comes up and doesn't try to be overbearing, comes up and just says, "Hey, how you doing? Are we having any luck today?" That demonstrates the officer has a true, genuine interest.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
if you start the conversation off of, are you having any luck? Yeah, I just caught a smallmouth down there on an AC shine or something like that. And then the officer responds back with, "Oh yeah, I've had my best luck with silvers or sometimes the blues." And you have a conversation about that. A couple things is taking place there. One is the officer's developing rapport with the individual. Two, the officer's gaining knowledge because the folks that actually engage in the recreational activities are the experts in the field.
Mm-hmm.
We talked earlier about the small numbers versus the big numbers of people that engage in recreational activity versus that small number of officers or DNR folks. We rely on that information to be good, accurate information that we can get back because it tells us maybe things like population trends and things along those lines. So if there's a genuine interest when the officer makes a contact in the field, it sets tone with the individual that's being contacted. This officer's not here to ruin my day. He's not here to interrupt me. He's here to make sure that I'm in compliance ultimately, but they have a genuine interest in the process. You know what I'm saying? It's just different. And even in my time as a field training officer and training young officers, that was something that I always try to instill in them is, look, this folk, these people out here engaging in what they want to do. It's their recreation, it's their getaway. So we're not here to try and catch them, so to speak, or try to bust them, so to speak. We're here to, have a conversation with them. They might share knowledge, that's helpful to the agency about the species or whatever, or they might also share information about something that is happening down the road that's unlawful or, that's a detriment to the resource. So, having a good positive kickoff to a contact, having genuine, a genuine interest in the process, and then also, letting them know, hey, it's not good guys and bad guys. It's not cops and robbers. We're not here to catch you. And sometimes it's hard to get across that barrier. And I'll give this equation. We've all seen it 1,000 times. You see a family out in a restaurant eating, and a uniformed officer, doesn't matter if it's a game warden or police officer, comes walking in, and you always have that one parent that says, "Little Johnny, you better eat your food, or I'm gonna have that cop arrest you and take you to jail."
Yep.
We've all seen that. So that kind of instills that process, right? And then that kind of leads that bridge into the person that's out there, hunting, fishing, whatever, is they already have that mindset of it's not a good time unless I kill something, unless I harvest something, and I got to get the bag limit. And the only one that's in my way of getting that bag limit or being a successful hunt or bragging rights is that daggone officer.
Mm-hmm.
So those two mentalities kind of, I think, go hand in hand. And a lot of folks, as they progress through their life as an outdoor enthusiast or recreational enthusiast, they go through different stages. And the first stage is I just got to get out there. It doesn't matter what the weather's like. I just got to get out there. And and I got to try my new gun, my new bow, my new whatever fishing rod. And then it progresses into I like to harvest. And then it progresses into I like to harvest a trophy. And then the last stage typically is the one where folks get a lot of enjoyment by being out in the natural resources areas, but they also get enjoyment out of introducing other folks to that process. And they get enjoyment out of just being out there and taking in the whole process. And when they harvest, it's a more meaningful thing. It's not like we have to go out and harvest every time we're out there, or it's not a successful day if we didn't go out and see, 6 turkeys or 11 deer, something like that. So that's a challenge point for any natural resource officer, whether, is bridging that with people to say, listen, we're out here enjoying it too. We're not here to ruin your day or anything. But those people that never get to that latter stage are the ones that are more inclined to be out there violating the laws, either purposely, and most times they have a pretty good knowledge base. They've got a pretty good idea what they're doing might be wrong, or they know exactly what they're doing is wrong. So that's always a challenge point, and it's that way anywhere. Within North America, I've had contacts, or I've been in Alaska and Alabama and California and the West Coast, East, all over. And you put a group of wildlife officers, conservation officers in a room, they all talk about 3 things. And they don't ever talk about being overpaid, I can tell you that. That's never a topic of conversation. But we all talk about that. We all talk about, those folks that, you feel like you make a difference with them because, you go up and check a family and talk to them, have that conversation with them in the field. And, the parent sees that genuine interest and the kids pick up on that. So when, that officer talks to that child 10 or 15 years down the road, they'll remember that contact because remember we talked about earlier how few contacts there actually are.
Yep.
And it's amazing. Even today, I'll see people and they'll come up to me and say, hey, I remember you checked us deer hunting and you got on us a little bit, but we had that one coming. Or, man, you guys checked us and it was good to see you. And, you told us about, where you saw a deer or who's been seeing what. Same way with fishing, and hunter ed as well, because it's important as a wildlife officer or a county officer to have that interaction, with folks, so they see that you're one of them, and they're not trying to violate a law just to spite you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So it goes a long way, and like I said, those things. It doesn't happen overnight, but it takes time, and like I said, those misconceptions of, a game warden's going to catch you if you do something wrong. I think it kind of goes back to the same parents in a restaurant that says, if you don't know your beans, Johnny, that cop's going to take you to jail, And I always looked at him and said, I didn't eat my beans as a kid. So.
That's the key piece, though, right there. Is there's a large education piece, I think, that kind of goes missed for a lot of people. I grew up certainly in a rural area, and there were plenty of people like that I knew who were, they despised game wardens, but it was kind of like one of those things like, well, have you ever actually met a game warden?
Right.
Like when you weren't doing something illegally?
Right.
Like have you, like every game warden that I ever met, I had this happen down at my brother's bachelor party down in Cumberland. We're standing on the bank and we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, guy pops out of the bushes. He goes, "Hey, you guys catching a lot of rainbows there?" Like, yeah, doing pretty well. And sat there, had a conversation with us, and he goes, "Hey, just need to see your license, make sure you're legal." All of us pulled out our licenses, all of us showed it, and he's like, "Okay, have a good day."
Yeah.
We murdered trout that day.
We
That was
destroyed
unfair.
trout.
That was unrealistic.
It was freezing cold though, but that was a great day.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because growing up, a lot of my family's from southern Kentucky, northern Tennessee, Cumberland Gap area, very Appalachian, and cops and game wardens, and you were taught to avoid them.
Yep.
And so that was my mantra growing up, and then I become friends with him and his brother, and start hanging out with them, go to Cumberland with them, exposed to, their beliefs, way of life, whatever, and their dad. And I remember specifically going down to Kentucky to hunt. I won't say where we were. I gotta be careful about that still. But I remember getting checked by an officer or seeing an officer behind us, me and Luke, on opening day. God, the parking lot was full of people. And I think that's the first time I ever got like super elated that a game warden was there, because I was like, oh, I'm going to get to talk to that guy and get some information. And what do you know? Not only do I get some information on that place and about how people have done over the past couple years, we're texting years in a row, and he's like giving me all these different little nuggets and honey holes, and I'm like, I wish I'd have known this. I got bad info, man.
Yeah, I've heard, like I said, I've heard different kind of statistics, but I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 80% of the folks that engage in recreational activity look for others for some guidance or
absolutely.
So those folks are the ones that, if they can interact with an officer in a positive manner, or hear from somebody else that's interacted with an officer in a positive manner, that furthers that process. And those people are happy and content, and they'll recruit other people into engaging in hunting, fishing, whatever the case might be, trapping. And there's 10% of the folks that are just the strict by the rule book. Those are the ones, when you come across them, they've got the fishing rigs in their hand. And once you're done with the conversation, I want to ask you about paragraph C4 here, and then another question about Q7. How, those are the folks, it doesn't matter. They're strictly by the book, literally. And then there's the percentage of folks that are never going to abide by any law whatsoever, because it's that us against them mentality. I do what I do. I don't trust any kind of law enforcement whatsoever for any reason ever, because they've had a bad experience in the past, or they've been told about bad things, and that's just that mentality that kind of will compound itself.
Sure.
But good quality officers that have a good, genuine interest, and have the communication skills to be able to interact with people, and you can tell really quick if somebody comes up to you and carries on a conversation and says, "Catch any deer? Deer hunt? Really?"
Oh man.
Yeah. But if you have an officer comes up and says, "Hey, listen, been seeing a deer here, so got a deer over here last year, or, we've been seeing him in the white oaks really good the last 2 weeks. You may want to look at, maybe moving a stand in the white oaks," something like that.
That right there.
Yeah. That's information.
Gold, man. That is gold.
Yeah. Yeah. That information. And like I said, there's so many officers that are like that out there. Like I said, I've interacted with officers all over North America, and I'm going to interact with a bunch here in a few weeks. And like I said, we all talk about the same three things. And like I said, one's definitely not being overpaid. Never comes up.
Man.
But that's the thing, if we expect our whole way of life to continue related to natural resources, I think that's an important element to keep in that process, to have folks appreciate it as much as the officers do, and to further that, like I said, I have folks come up to me, and they'll say, "Hey, you taught me in Hunter Ed class back, 20 years ago. Do you remember me?" And I'm like, "Where was it?" A lot of times I can remember, but I've done hundreds of Hunter Ed classes and thousands and thousands of contacts in the field. But it's surprising how many, once they give me a few little tidbits, I can remember. "Oh, yeah, I remember you. Yeah, you were down there by the creek, and your dad's truck was stuck, and we helped get him out. Or, you had a flat tire, or you needed us to make a phone call for you because you didn't have any cell phone coverage, but you didn't want to leave." I understand that. So, when I got coverage, I made that call for you. Perfectly okay.
Awesome.
Yeah. Or, let somebody else know that they need to bring the four-wheeler back to help drag a deer or something like that, because there's an issue with communications and stuff like that. Oh my gosh, I've got so many of those stories that, it's like, you can't make this stuff up. And I joke all the time, if I ever were to put a book together, I'd have to mark it as fiction, because nobody would believe most of the stuff other than game wardens would believe that, because they always got another story too. "Hey, I had a guy do this one." That's just the nature of us.
It's the same when you talk to cops. The majority of their job is not busting people. They're pulled over on the side of the road with their lights on, helping somebody fix a flat or at least keeping them safe, and just all that different stuff that no one ever wants to think about. But I think at the end of the day, if you can just hold yourself accountable, it's a lot easier to get along with anybody in law enforcement.
True. Yeah, it's true. Just a general principle of what's appropriate and what's not, I guess, is a good way to look at it. And then further that, like I said, the more that you do that, other people kind of catch on. And that whole mentality mindset, when you're sitting around with the folks and in the evening time, you're not talking about, how many things you guys did in violation of law. It's like, hey, yeah, we're doing this, and did you see that change in the law about tagging deer or something like that? It's that type of mentality, that type of conversation, that type of groupness, I guess, is the best way to describe it. And as long as we do that, the things that we hold value will be furthered, like having opportunities for our kids and my grandkids to engage in the same things that I did. That's always a big goal for me, is to make sure that we further our process to ensure that the next generation has the same, if not a better opportunity than what we had growing up.
Absolutely. One of the things that I always preach is, one, read your regs. Always, every season, read your regs. But like, people will hop on social media and say, "Hey, does anybody know this?" And my first question always is like, "Did you contact the game warden?"
Hey, Google.
Did you call your local game warden's office or dispatch or anything like that? And crickets, because it's scary to call the game warden for whatever reason.
Well, yeah, and that mentality is something that we've got to work to get past. But like you said, Rick, in today's day and age, there's so many different avenues to gain knowledge or to gain data, whether it be obviously online, but phone calls or web, anything. It's not like before where it was just nothing but written regs that you had to put in your back pocket. There's so many, and I tell folks when I worked, the apps on the phones are phenomenal.
Yes.
Most states have an app. Everything's on there, and it's real time. That's the neat part about it. It's not like a printed document that's printed, 9 months prior. Something changes. It's real time on those apps.
Absolutely.
Our app is the best damn app in the business, too.
Ohio's is great.
I love
Ohio's
the fact that you can tag a deer in Antarctica, and as soon as you get back to cell phone service, she's in. Like, you're good.
Yep, exactly.
It's cool.
Yep, and that's part of, as society progresses and technology progresses. That's something we've been fortunate enough. We've got good folks that put that together for the states. Other states, may be a little bit further behind in that curve, but they're all to some degree, gaining in that area for sure.
Did you see the guy that posted in the group today asking about Wisconsin? He's like, I just wanted to know if I could bring a whole deer back from Wisconsin, or if Wisconsin wouldn't allow me to travel over their state lines without deboning it or whatever. And I'm like, and he's from Ohio. He states this. And I'm like, brother, you need to go read your regs. And furthermore, you should know your home state's regs like a boss.
Yeah. Yep.
And you are not allowed.
This is pretty clearly.
This is a very, very, I'm pretty sure it's in Jesus lettering, the red lettering or whatever.
Yeah.
You have to debone everything in Ohio, or, coming in to Ohio, it has to be deboned, all brain matter removed, all that. So I was a little disappointed. And then I suggested doing some research, because he's asking, people on Facebook. And I'm like, need to go read your regs. Well, I was going to, but I'm like, clearly you haven't really looked a lot through your regs. I would highly recommend just spend an hour going through Ohio's regs so you don't get in trouble.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's the regs are put there more for a management tool. We're managing the resource, and that's what the regs are there. And one aspect of a wildlife officer is they're a tool for wildlife management. That's one aspect of the job is a tool to effectively manage a resource, and part of that is to enforce the regulations, but also to protect those resources as well. Whether it be routine patrol on a public area to address litter issues, or to address a timber theft issue, or to address off-roading issues, or anything like that. That's just one aspect. But a big aspect of the job is to to be a tool for the biologist that set the regulations to make sure that our season bag limits align with what's best for the populations as well, and also to make sure that we're providing opportunity to take a trophy or just at least see something when you're out there, whether it be a fish, deer, non-game, eagle, osprey, things along those lines as well. That maybe the folks that don't necessarily go out to be on the consumptive side gets to see their butterflies.
Yeah.
The amount of things people will take from nature, like, I don't know, the whole butterfly story, our box turtle stories.
Box turtles,
Yeah,
Like-
it's just got to be worth money. The only reason why people will do that is because somebody's willing to pay them.
Yep.
It's disgusting.
And, there has to be value. And a lot of that value is determined by culture.
Yep.
We might not put value on it, but another culture may put value on that.
Oh,
And, if they do, then it's just a matter of money to profit,
Yeah.
working some of the, just a typical case. Like I always tell folks, the only reason why people, would go on an area to steal a tree is because somebody's willing to pay them for it.
Yep.
sure.
Only reason they do it,
Yep.
Yeah.
and you just got to kind of keep that in mind. Things that are culturally not acceptable to us might be someplace else, and there's really no boundaries or no like set distance that it has to be. I mean, things. Go back to the paddlefish. Not many people here would consume paddlefish, but I can tell you other parts of the world certainly will, and will pay big money to do it.
Yep.
Wow.
So
You ever feel like we're in an area that just has a completely different culture, especially a little further east?
I wouldn't say culture, but maybe just different value.
Okay.
The culture is pretty much
Different mentality,
yeah,
maybe?
just like different value, different aspects, different outlook on life.
Okay.
I guess value. When I say outlook, is as an individual assigns like value to something or what's important to them. Is that
Yeah.
That
Okay.
makes sense?
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It's a good explanation.
So that kind of rolls us into perspective as a whole. So one of the things that we talked about at the start of this was you were injured in the line of duty, and you have a very unique perspective on the situation as a whole as the person who happened to, but also the process of recovery, the process of eventually speaking to people about it. So we're wondering if it would be okay to kind of dive a little bit into that and the kind of the incident and how everything kind of played out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm not shy about it at all. I was shot. Some people kind of like your incident, your situation, your accident. No, I was shot. A guy decided he was going to murder me that day, and he almost got it done. If it hadn't been for some very good doctors that revived me multiple times, that process would have been completed. I was shot December 20th of 2020. Not real big on the number 20 anymore.
Yeah, no shit. Jesus.
But I was shot about 3:20 in the afternoon on the very last day of the bonus gun season in Ohio. So Ohio has a regular week-long gun season, and then it closes, and we have a bonus weekend. So this was like the waning minutes of our modern firearm season of that year. To give a little bit of background, we had a situation that had been brought to our attention where some individuals were targeting deer in a specific area. And the way they targeted deer was they like to trespass, they like to drive up and down the road, they like to try to harvest them in violation of law because their mentality was it's us against them. Nobody can tell me I can't shoot a deer. I always shoot the biggest deer. And for those folks, it's not about the deer they're killing, it's about the next one. So just that mentality. So we had set up a project. The uniformed officers had requested my assistance to try to address those folks because, the landowners in the area had complained that, they had ran these guys off and said, don't come back. We know what you guys are up to. You've been here before. You've been told to leave. Don't come back. So the way we put a project together to address it was that we were going to use a decoy deer. And it's not a monster deer. It's nothing like that. Typically the deer are they're small.
So they were going to shoot a little buck?
Yeah. So we typically don't use. People think, we use these big monster 200 inch. No. We have deer that are very small in stature, and we place them. We're very specific on how those projects are ran. One, we got to make sure that it's going to be safe. That when a firearm is discharged, that the bullet will be terminal in the ground. That we try to control as many variables as we possibly can. another big aspect to when we set these projects up is we set the decoy animal in an area that's pretty obscure, so that the average person driving by is not going to see it, because we don't want it sitting on the white line of the road or in the edge of a field that everybody driving by is honking the horn trying to shoo it off or
Bear jam.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So part of that process is we document how many vehicles go by in a course of a given amount of time and never acknowledge it. But we have people that come by that are, on the brakes a lot, slowing down, stopping, looking. They're looking for deer. You might be able to see, binoculars or a rifle scope. They're actively hunting deer from a vehicle. So we'd set the project up, and we're kind of busy that day. My memory's kind of foggy, but I rely on what others have told me. But the long and short of it was the uniformed officers had dropped me off with my equipment, and the plan was that I would set the decoy up in a very specific area that was very safe as far as having a firearm discharged at it, and that I was going to go across a little one-lane road back into like a weeded area that I could watch the activity that occurred around the decoy, and then if there was activity there, that I would radio the uniformed officers to make a stop. The uniformed marked vehicles, light sirens, the whole bit, to be able to make a stop. So, my function in that is not to be a contact person. I'm the person that sets up the process, but stands back and observes, notifies the uniformed guys, what's there, and then call them in to address the conduct. So apparently they dropped me off. I stashed my gear right next to the road in a little kind of a weeded hillside area, kind of ditch kind of area. I go out, put the decoy in the spot that we had decided would be best for it, got it all set up, ready to go. I got back to my equipment, which distance-wise, it was probably close to, it was in excess of 100 feet, 200 feet maybe. I don't know the distances, but they've told me that it was quite a ways. And looking on the map, I surmise it's several hundred feet. So I get back to my equipment, and I hear gravel popping, and I hear a noise. So when I heard the noise, I thought, oh, shoot, somebody's here already. So I got down on my hands and knees and kind of in the fetal position in a ball, had my elbows on the ground, it's curled up in a ball as high as I could get, had my equipment right in front of me, and I had my radio right in my hand. And I thought, I'm going to tell the uniform guys there's somebody here. So with our portable radios, when you key up the mic, there's an attention tone. It's like a little chirp you can hear from a long way off. I mean, it's just one of those things you can hear it from a long way off. So I key my radio up, attention chirp goes off, and I tell the uniform guys, hey, listen, there's somebody here close. Let's hang tight and see what happens. As soon as I let my thumb off of the push-to-talk little mic is when he shot me. He shot me at less than 50 feet with a 20-gauge deer slug. The slug entered my left back pocket and traversed all the way across my abdomen, shattered my pelvis, and stopped against my diaphragm. And when he shot me, I knew instantly that I was shot because, and this is something you talk to other folks that have actually been shot, you feel it and then you hear it. We've all been around when guns go off, but you will feel it, then you will hear it. And what it felt like to me was somebody hit me with a sledgehammer as hard as they could right in my left back pocket. And it felt like somebody was pouring molten steel through my body from my pelvis up to the top of my skull. So I screamed at him to stop shooting, call 911. And this individual yelled some things back to me that made me believe that his intention was to make sure that I was dead. So I made my mind up. I'm going to make it hard for him to do this because I'm not going to be in the same place I was when he shot me. He's going to have to look for me. Now, mind you, it was less than 50 feet, but there were some weeds. And there was a tree right in front of me. So I remember trying to pull myself down away from that tree and talk on the radio. And I keyed the radio back up and told him, I hit the emergency button. I remember the screen turned red. I thought, I don't remember that. But anyway, I told the officers that I'd been shot, I needed help, and that I was in bad shape because my legs were going at very unnatural positions from my pelvis being shattered. But I made my mind up. I was not going to be where I was when he shot me the first time. I was going to make him work for it because I thought he's going to come up and deliver the coup de grace at point blank, or he's going to lay back because he knows there's officers coming because I've called for help. He can hear me talking, like I said, less than 50 feet. He can hear what I'm telling the officers on the radio, that he's going to lay back and he's going to ambush the officers as they come into me. So I'm trying to roll and pull myself, and I'm trying to get my gun out to defend myself. I'm trying to do a lot of things at the same time, but as I'm trying to do that, my body's starting to shut down. So my right side was the kind of the last thing to quit working, so to speak. So I was going out of consciousness, but I was trying to pull myself to get away from him. And I remember that in that process, I lost my radio, and I was trying to get it. It was above me, and I couldn't get it. And I remember it was just dead silent. There was not any kind of noise, and I was listening for him, thinking, okay, he's coming up to get me, or he's coming up, to shoot me again at point blank. And I remember hearing the sirens, and I was trying to think what I'm going to tell the officers when I get there. Well, I'm trying to yell for them to tell them, hey, he's still here. I don't know where he's at. So I'm yelling at the officers, hey, he's above us here someplace. He's above us. He's above us. And I'm trying to move, and things are not happening very well. The officers are trying to get to me. They're yelling for me. And finally they get to me, and they're trying to administer first aid, and I can hear more sirens coming. And then I lost consciousness at that point. They continued to work on me. I remember coming in and out several times, and other people being around me and things. And that particular day, the weather was really, in pilot's terms, marginal. It was just really a low cloud ceiling, wet, rainy day. But the medevac helicopter was able to fly, and so they got to me. They landed. I remember they rolled me up on a gurney. Not to get too graphic, but things were going different directions, and so I remember looking when they rolled me up on the gurney. There was a syringe laying on the ground. I remember yelling to one of the officers, "Pick that up, or somebody gets hurt here." Why? And they confirmed that. They said, "Do you remember the syringe thing?" I said, "Vaguely," but anyway. So they got me loaded up in the helicopter, flew me by the nap of the land straight to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. It's a level 1 trauma center. And we were there within that golden hour. We were there within less than an hour. I remember the helicopter landing. I remember the flight nurse saying, "We've got to go. They're waiting on us. We can't wait on them." And I remember when they offloaded me off the helicopter, the main rotor was still spinning pretty hot. And I thought, all my times I've been around medevac helicopters, somebody must be hurt pretty bad because that helicopter's hot. And they usually unload and load when the big main rotor's spinning. But It was. So I remember them taking me in, and we're going through all these silver doors. And finally we go in this little room. It's about the same size as this room right here. There's so many bright lights, and there were so many people in that room. They were all doing something to me at the exact same time. And the last voice I remember hearing was a male voice that said, "Okay, let's go ahead and put him completely out." And that was the last thing I had. I ended up being in the intensive care unit, level 1 at the University of Cincinnati hospital. Did 28 days in there. Did another 11 days in the regular hospital, and then did another 50 days inpatient therapy, and then about 18 more months of outpatient therapy. And it's still going on. It's today. It'd be 4.5 years since I was shot. So it'd be 4.5 years this June 20th. To date, I've had 15 surgeries. Got some more stuff coming. But that's just part of the process. That's just how it is. This is, to say the least, it's been a journey. It still is. And people sometimes will kind of, not real sure to ask the question, but you can kind of see. And the question is always, what's been the hardest? And the hardest thing for me, and I don't shy away from it, is I know exactly how I was before I got shot. I know exactly how my family were. I know how the people around me were. And there's no way that I can ever get back to that. No matter what I do, there's no way that I can get back to that. My wife describes it best as there was life before you got shot, and now there's life after you got shot, and there is no such thing as normal anymore. There's just okay and probably not okay. But no, it's a journey. It's a process. I said early on, that I was going to, one, be grateful for all the people that all the work to me. I can never repay all the support that's been given to my family and my family especially, but myself. A lot of that stuff was going on as I was in and out of consciousness, and all the times that that I wasn't, because I wasn't coherent for quite a while. But so that's a struggle point for me. But I've always said that I was going to try to make this ugly, wicked, horrible thing into any aspect that I could in a positive manner. And, I have tough days. I have struggle days like everybody else. But at least if I can turn this aspect positively any way that I can, whether it be sharing my data that's generated from my care process, to talking with medical professionals and telling them, what worked for me as far as the care that I received. Talking to other folks that have gone through trauma events, doing public speaking engagements. To me, anything that I can do to turn this thing into any aspect of positivity, I'm all for it. And, sometimes it's a little harder than others, but that's kind of the mantra, the mindset that I've taken up. And the other thing is I try to inject humor in the process anywhere I can, because I find the more humor I inject in this process, the less room there is for despair and some of those other thoughts that can creep in there. But no, it's one of those things where if it hadn't been for the quick actions of the officers that were there, and they flat put their life in danger because they had no idea if this guy was going to try to shoot them, if he was still waiting, because he wasn't there rendering aid. The other guys that were with him all ran away, left as well. Nobody rendered any aid to me whatsoever. I knew that from my experience in being lead investigators in a shooting situation, is typically in a situation like that, if the shooter doesn't stand and render aid to the victim, a lot of times there's other extenuating circumstances along with that. So I knew that in my mindset, and that I wanted to convey that to those folks. But from the very beginning, the way the officers just disregarded their own well-being and charged right in there to render aid to me, knowing, how my status was, whether I would actually survive this thing or not, to the care that I received initially with the trauma team, and all the way through the care I've received since then with the different therapists and the programs. And like I said, we're still ongoing. I've still got some stuff coming, but at least, I'm to the point to where I feel like I can contribute. Now, the next question is, are you still working? No, I was medically separated, in May of 23, because there's no way with my physical limitations that I would be able to come back to work at 100%. There's just a limited availability of like a reduced status, like a light duty or something. I couldn't do that. I could not do that, indefinitely. So I was medically separated. So it gave me 30 good years of a career.
Yeah,
no regrets. I probably would skip that part. But
Yeah, that is crazy. So you had issues at that time, and then was it later when you had the septic issue?
Yeah, so as the process kind of played out and all the work and things, and the doctors told my wife that, if we can get him past that golden, 5 to 8 day range with no septic issues, then, we'll be in a better place. Well, in the meantime, I'd had cardiac arrest. I'd had all kinds of things creep up, and I was almost to that 5th or 6th day, and I had went septic, and oh my gosh. I've got different, I have different snapshots of things, but I can't put them in order, and, being on a ventilator and being on dialysis and that, and those side of things. But yeah, I think it was around day 5, 6 when I went septic, and then I went back on the ventilator for another 10 days and was unconscious. And then, we were worried, coming out of that, how much more damage, my organs had sustained, with the sepsis and the lack of oxygen and things. But initially I didn't have much function on my pancreas, liver, kidneys, obviously. And lo and behold, a little at a time, they started kind of coming back around a little bit. people ask me too, some of the things that you experienced, or when you were, don't you think that was drug-induced delirium, or did you think it was just a drug? And I was like, well, let me give you an example. Here's the difference. Okay, I got to the point to where when I was somewhat coherent that I was going to surgery, I kind of knew what was going on, and I remember going into them just telling me, hey, you're going to surgery, because I knew it was happening, because they would just start unhooking things, and away I'd go. So I go into the surgery room, and I can still tell you it's got blue tiles along the top of the surgery room there and everything. I look over to my left, and there's another bed over there. And I look, and here's the Bengals quarterback, Joe Burrow, laying on that bed. He kind of looks over at me, gives me a nod and a thumbs up, like, well, that's cool. Yeah, so they bring me back out of surgery, and, I'm in recovery with my ICU nurses and stuff. And I remember the nurse, he's from Oklahoma. He's got a scar on top of his head from antenna on a helicopter, and excellent guy. And I said, hey, I know who was in that surgery room there, and I know you can't tell me, but can you at least tell me if I guess it right? And he's like, whatever. And I said, I looked over, and Joe Burrow's in the surgery room with me. And he kind of says, I think Joe got his knee done in California. I looked back at him. I said, how long have we been in California? Now, I didn't know that Joe Burr had a knee injury, because that happened, right around the time when I got shot. I had no idea. So apparently I had picked that up somewhere on TV or something. But I was sure that I'd saw Joe Burrow, and he convinced me that I was not in California, and that there was nobody else in there with me. But other things that happened, there's a big difference.
Yeah.
But you just got to laugh. You just got to, okay. But no, that was. Then there's a lot of different little stories like that along our process. But yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm glad to have you here, man. You definitely defeated a lot of odds to be sitting here today.
I was saying, it's just like, just maybe I don't know. Early on in the process, I thought, there's so many people put so much effort into this process of me, that the only thing I can do is just claw and scratch for everything. And I remember some of the first things that I was able to do was just move this hand just a little bit. It's the only thing in my body that would move that wasn't in. I made my decision that, I was going to, can't repay it, but at least show appreciation for all the effort. And it still goes on today. It's amazing how much support my family and I still get, and it's amazing. So I always, when those things come, I always try to apply that towards something else is going on. Whether it be going and visiting an individual that has recently gone through a traumatic injury, or talking with their family. I try to dedicate and make myself available for those things. As people support me, I try to do that as best I can, because there's no way that I can pay it forward, at any stretch of the imagination. I just try to, live with the mantra of, just spread kindness. That's the best thing that we can do. And that's kind of the attitude that I've tried to take going forward, from this. And like I said, I always try to, anytime I can, is share with people, because maybe one little thing that I share with them on my survival tactic or what I did may help somebody else down the road. So I'm never shy about that. When I speak to groups of officers or other folks like that, I always make sure that that's a topic that I hit pretty hard. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Do you feel like there's a key takeaway that people tend to miss in situations like you've been through, whether it's recovery, whether it's the actual event itself, or whether it's interactions post-op, or like even up until the point where you're at now?
First and foremost, I think life's not defined by the bad things that happens to us. It's defined by what you do afterwards. So that's probably number one. And, number two would be, just, and it's hard, but just try to be positive and try to do something that's positive in the aspect. And it's not like it's going to be that way every second, every minute of the day. But, if we take set our goals, either have a very short memory or very long memory. And I remember this is what I told the doctors when they were interviewing me a little bit down the road. What made you get here so we could work on you. And I said, well, I said, a lot of things. I said, one was I decided that, I was going to die. I had no doubt about it. I've done enough investigations with people that have been shot, and I knew that I was probably not going to make it. But I decided that I wasn't gonna pass away there in the field with my brother officers, because I wasn't going to put that on them. The second thing that I thought was, well, I'm not going to die here, because then the guy that shot me is going to have the satisfaction knowing that he did complete his actions and kill an officer. And then, moving forward from there, I just set very small goals. And I said, I'm not going to die here. I thought, if I can just stay alive until the squad gets here, because I knew that there was a squad going to come there first before the helicopter got there. I'm just going to stay alive till the squad gets here. And then I thought, well, if I can just stay alive till the helicopter gets here, then I'm not here. And then I thought, when the helicopter got there and they loaded me up, and I thought, well, if I can just make it till I get to the hospital, because I knew, UC is a level 1 trauma center, that's the best care there is in the world. And one thing that was very fortunate about my situation was UC cross trains with the military and is very, not say used to, but has experience in treating folks that have blast injuries from the lower extremities. So that was one thing that helped me, was the fact that I went to Cincinnati and not Columbus or Dayton. And, that it's just those small little goals. And it's like I tell other folks, is like, either have a real short memory or a real long memory when it comes to what you're able to accomplish on a weekly or hourly basis or daily basis. And I always tell folks, sets and people in my similar situations to mine is do something today, and then don't come back to that activity for 6 months. And you won't notice the differences, daily, but you notice things over a longer period of time. And I think that's true in a lot of aspects of life as well.
Absolutely.
You don't notice the little things, but it's all those little things together that totally, when they're put together, add up to milestones. And like I said, by no stretch of imagination, it's not easy, and folks say, well, you're a miracle. Well, yeah, that's true. But the miracle is the people that were put around me at that particular point in time that did what they did, because I had the easy part. Everybody else had the hard part. I just do what I'm told, and sometimes not very good at it, but I always joke, I got the easy part. You guys got the hard part. But, the miracles, the folks that were put around me at that one instant in time, it's amazing how many of those folks have gone separate directions from now. And we still kind of keep in track, and converse back and forth and things like that. But the miracle is the people are put together at the exact period in time and what they were able to do for me, and all I did was just be too stubborn to let go. Because I remember, that when I went in and heard that voice in the little OR that said, okay, let's put him completely under. I couldn't talk anymore because I was trying to talk so they knew I was alive, but all I could do was breathe in, and it was about like, and I was struggling to get every breath. Every breath was a struggle, but I knew if I was breathing, because I couldn't talk anymore, but if I was breathing, I was still alive. And, some of the trauma folks said, if you can get here in that golden hour, we've got something we can work with, and they certainly did. Absolutely phenomenal what they did for me, and still continue to do. I think I'm kind of a project, and they like to check up on me once in a while, see how their work's going, and I always try to be open for that as well. But yeah,
I love the aspect and the perspective that you take on this, because in my field with counseling, I talk with people about this, specifically with veterans frequently, is that we can't change what happened. Like when something bad like this happens, we can move forward from it, and we got to figure out the best way for you to do that. And is it ever going to be the way that it was? It's not. Yeah. Like we can't change anything about that. But if we take these small steps and we're doing the things we need to, and you're setting these small goals, 6 months from now, you're going to be looking at it from a completely different perspective. And you're going to look back and say, I was there, and now I'm here.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And, you've moved the needle to where you feel like, there's always going to be time to move it forward more. But it's important to take into account those things that you're doing well and that you're actively trying to manage in those situations.
Oh, yeah. I always joke, the healing kind of graph, it just goes in every direction. There's no straight lines on the healing graph whatsoever. And, And that's just the reality of it, you know, and everybody's journey is different. And, you know, it's those small things that'll add up. But, you know, what's good for me sometimes can be a challenge point for others. But I always tell folks, you know, that go through this is like life before, life after, and don't use the normal word. You know, use, that's okay, or maybe that's not okay, you know, as you progress through life, you know.
Normal's a setting on a washing machine.
Yeah, and I'm not good at that.
Right? Man, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's for realsies.
Yeah.
There is no normal.
No, there's not. There's not. Well, I mean, Kevin, do you have any other wisdom you'd like to impart on our listeners and our viewers for that matter, on something that you feel is important that, you know, they should look into or that they can do to support you know, situations like this?
Yeah, sure. You know, first and foremost, for the folks in you know, the law enforcement or first responder side, always take your training seriously, and, you know, put that extra little effort in, because it'll pay dividends down the road. And, you know, for the folks that are traveling through this process, you know, like I said before, it's the little steps. And, you know, I'm not by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I have rough times like everybody else, but, you know, knowing how to, you know, what's worked for me in the past. And, you know, just for the folks out there walking the streets, man, you know, just be kind to people. You know, you never know when you could be somebody's miracle. You know, and those folks that worked on me were definitely my miracle. You know, from the officers to the EMTs to the trauma docs, and then all the folks with my recovery since then. You know, and still ongoing. You know, and like I said, you know, coming back to that natural resource side of things, I've had people say, all over a deer. You got basically cut in two all over a deer. I'm like, yeah, sure did.
What? Any guesses as to the size, score-wise, the deer you were putting out?
They're not very big. You know, maybe they might be like 115 if you was to measure them, like a little 6 or 8 pointer. You know, we don't put anything massive out, and there's nothing massive, you know, out. That's one misconception. They put things out, you know, these big monster hole in the horn deer. No, they're not. You
So
know,
they're not even trophy hunting. They're just out to just
they're out there
shoot something.
Yep. They're that 10% that we talked about or less, that, you know, just they're out there to facilitate, you know, what they want to do, or, you know, what kind of gives them gratification, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, you know, for the whole entire process, you lay it out and you show folks, you know, kind of like I showed you guys beforehand. It's like, there's so many misconceptions out there. I don't read the internet whatsoever. I mean, you can Google as much as you want on my situation. There's all kind of stuff out there, but I don't do much social media. I'm not a real big presence on social media at all, just because of that side of things.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
I'd actually heard that the guy who shot you actually helped you and all that. So when you told me all that, I didn't know how to feel, honestly.
No,
because I was like, oh, attempted murder. Okay, I thought he was 250 yards across a field or something, and took an angle that you weren't aware of, and you were close to the decoy.
He had to turn about 180 degrees from where he was to look at the decoy. He had to turn about 180 degrees to get to me, and I was less than 50 feet from him, and he had a scope on the gun, and he basically just lined up on my left back pocket, and that's what he pressed the trigger on.
Ugh.
So that's very I mean, that's a sub 20 yard with a 20 gauge slug.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad he didn't have a straight wall, at least, because that could have been even worse.
Yeah.
Dear God. I can't, but that's amazing that you survived a 20 gauge slug going through that area of your body. We'll never want to meet you in a dark alley, man. That's incredible. Because, I've shot so many deer with a shotgun and know exactly what things like that do. Like, I understand what's going on in there, and that is unreal. Yep. So congratulations, I think. Well, sort of. I don't really know.
Yeah, appreciate that.
That's so crazy, but that is miraculous. And, you know, again, glad we're sitting here having this conversation at the very least.
Yeah, wouldn't miss it for the world.
I really appreciate you coming and sitting down with us tonight, because I feel, like I said, I feel like this is something that people need to be aware of, and specifically, we've got it. I mean, we've we had my dad on here. My dad was a watercraft officer for 30 years. We take law enforcement seriously, and it's not one of those things that you're the boogeyman waiting to jump out and get you. It's you're a normal guy doing a job, and most of the time you're there to help people with the resource, and that's the way that it needs to be looked at.
Yep, exactly.
I agree.
We can't, just because this one individual did this thing that he did to me, we can't paint all people that engage in the outdoors that way.
Yeah.
Like I said, and I don't like to spend a lot of time. I don't dwell on him. Yep.
It's probably the most healthy thing you could do is just distance yourself from that, because I could see where you could go down some dark roads there real quick.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, man, we're really grateful that you came on.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Appreciate it, man.
Good to share.
Appreciate you, brother.
Yep. Good to share.
Guys, this has been the Mobile Hunter Podcast, Psyche of a Hunter series. Thank you for joining us for our last episode of the year, and we'll have the series back at the start of next year in January. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.